In today's video, we will be covering two caving disasters that shocked the world. In both stories, both men found themselves trapped, fighting against time as hypothermia set in from the icy waters, but only one survived. The first story was a poorly planned exploration by three cavers that went horribly wrong when one of them descended a shaft with ice-cold water flowing down it. Before he could even go down a few feet, he had already begun to freeze to death as he struggled to climb back up. The second story consisted of a paramedic and experienced caver who fought for the life of his friend who was pinned in a crevice, fighting against hypothermia and the icy cold water that sit above his shoulders. The Schroeder's Pants Cave Tragedy. Schroeder's Pants Cave, nestled near Goodell Corners in Herkimer County, New York, was first explored by two men, Herbert W. Schroeder and George A. Buck. In case you're wondering how pants came to be part of the name, that is because during their expedition, Schroeder had an incident that ended with a torn trouser, hence pants. But even though the cave has a funny name, there was nothing funny about what happened in it on February 13, 1965. That day, three adventurers from the Boston Grotto Club set out to explore Schroeder's Pants Cave. They were Mitchell, an experienced caver, Hetty Miller, a nurse, and Charles Bennett, a Harvard graduate. Like any other group of explorers, they were eager for the adventure into the caves, but what started like an exploration would have a twisted turn of events. The trio had no idea of the temperature in the region over the last couple of weeks. This was an issue because it had caused an unusually high volume of runoff. Ice-cold water gushed through the cave's passageways, creating unfavorable conditions. Eventually, they reached an open area where they encountered a vertical shaft extending 80 feet into darkness. But there was a problem. There was water pouring down this shaft, but not just any water, ice cold and hard to maneuver. Nevertheless, Mitchell, determined to explore further, prepared to descend. He secured his safety lines and began going down the shaft, the frigid water cascading around him. This was where everything went out of hand. With the icy torrent of water pouring over him, Mitchell finally realized that this was tougher than he had anticipated. Desperate, he tried to pull himself back up, but his efforts were leading him nowhere. His hand kept slipping on the rope, now made slick by the water. With every passing minute, up to 10 gallons of icy water battered his head, freezing him as well as sapping his strength. Miller shouted down at him, asking if he needed assistance, but Mitchell shouted back, telling his companions that he could make it up himself. But even he wasn't convinced with his own words, as the situation grew increasingly dire. Mitchell's voice grew fainter until it couldn't be heard again. Panic set in as Miller and Bennett frantically tried to lift him to safety, but their efforts proved futile. After 45 agonizing minutes, Bennett made the harrowing decision to leave the cave and seek help. The call for aid mobilized the newly formed National Capital Grotto Rescue Squad, who flew in from Washington, D.C. aboard Air Force Two. News of the disaster spread quickly, and it didn't take long before the news of this disaster gripped the nation. The rescue effort became a race against time, with Mitchell's life hanging in the balance. Mitchell had succumbed to the relentless onslaught of icy water and the unforgiving conditions of the cave. The weight of his loss hung heavy on all involved. The mission shifted from rescue to recovery, but even this proved impossible. As workers attempted to retrieve Mitchell's 185-pound body, part of the cave collapsed under the strain of heavy drilling. Eventually, a decision was made to lower his body deeper into the cave, which was then sealed with dynamite. A memorial headstone was placed above the site, marking the spot where Mitchell's life had ended and his grave was formed. For years, Schroeder's Pants Cave remained a somber monument to this tragedy. But in 1967, a different entrance to the cave was discovered, and a few brave cavers managed to reach the area where Mitchell's remains rested. However, decades later, Mitchell's story resurfaced when plans were made to honor his memory more tangibly. So on a cold Monday morning, some of his ashes were entrusted to his family, while others were given to a close friend, Lyon, who vowed to scatter them near the cave. The next caving disaster is not like any you've heard of on this channel, so brace yourself. The Vancouver Cave Tragedy. December 5th, 2015 was just another normal day for spelunkers Andrew Munoz, Jason Story, and four of their friends as they prepared to explore Cascade, a remote cave system on Vancouver Island. For Munoz, an experienced caver and paramedic, the challenges of navigating narrow passages were nothing new. Together with Jason Story and four other companions, they embarked on what they thought would be another day of thrilling exploration. But Cascade was no ordinary cave. Stretching about 1.5 kilometers in length and plunging 338 feet deep, it was a system of large chambers and beautiful waterfalls. Gaining access required signing a waiver and unlocking a secure metal hatch. This wasn't a cave for rookie spelunkers, something Munoz and his friends were not. So they felt they had nothing to worry about, but they knew very little of the fate awaiting them. As they descended 340 feet below the surface, they passed landmarks named by previous explorers and given rather odd names. One such spot was Double Trouble, a powerful waterfall that was cold enough to induce hypothermia and also had the strength to sweep someone not holding tightly to their grave. Pressing on, they reached Bastard's Crawl, a narrow passage notorious for the heavy stream of water that surged through it. The passage is so small that getting through requires crawling in a very awkward position. Hours into their exploration, they decided it was time to head back. But going back up would prove to be a lot harder than their descent. The group began their return journey, one by one, squeezing through Bastard's Crawl. The water's relentless pressure tested their resolve. When it was Story's turn, disaster struck. As he entered the narrow section, the force of the water pulled him in and pinned him, trapping him like a cork in an hourglass. Panic erupted as his cry of fear echoed through the cave's damp walls. It was a guttural, primal sound that Munoz would never forget. Munoz, aware of the severity of the situation, sprang into action. The cold water cascading over Story was unrelenting, and hypothermia was a looming threat. Worse still, just beyond Bastard's Crawl lay another waterfall, a deadly 16-foot drop. Story's cries grew weaker as minutes turned into hours. Munoz worked feverishly, eventually freeing Story's trapped leg with a rope. But this relief didn't last long, because the Bastard's Crawl wasn't going to be an easy task. While Munoz sent their friends to call for rescue, he sought refuge with Story on a small, sloping ledge near the top of the waterfall. Measuring only 6 feet by 6 feet and tilting at a 45-degree angle, it was hardly a sanctuary. Plus, Story's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His body had endured 15 minutes in the icy water, and he was slipping into hypothermia. Hours passed in total darkness. Munoz and Story sat braced against the wall, their headlamps switched off to conserve battery. The raging sound of rushing water filled the void, reminding them of their danger. By 6:30 a.m., nearly 18 hours after their ordeal began, they noticed the water's turbulence had subsided. With no guarantee of survival, they knew this was their only chance. His screams echoed throughout the cave as he hauled himself upward. He did this all through fatigue as he was driven by the sheer willpower to survive. Meanwhile, rescue teams had been mobilized but were unable to reach them due to the cave's treacherous conditions. Munoz described the isolation as being more remote than Mount Everest. You might as well be on the moon. Unknown to him, rescuers had brought bone saws, expecting to recover bodies rather than survivors. Finally, Munoz and Story emerged into the light of day. The sight of the rescue team rushing to their aid was surreal. Against all odds, they had survived. For the rescuers, the disbelief was palpable. Videos of their ordeal, captured by Munoz's helmet-mounted camera, would later serve as a powerful training tool for first responders. In the weeks that followed, Munoz processed the trauma through counseling. Watching the footage for the first time, he felt a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Yet the ordeal did not deter him or Story. Remarkably, They returned to Cascade's depths, conquering their fears and retracing their steps to the spot where their lives had hung by a thread. Cascade's beauty and peril remain intertwined, a reminder of the thin line between adventure and tragedy. For Munoz and Story, their survival was nothing short of a miracle, a testament to resilience, friendship, and the unyielding human spirit. These two tragedies were never seen coming. Everything that could have gone wrong did. But which of these stories shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.